All right, section 5.4 is going to show us how to solve percent equations. So there's a couple of key things that we're going to want to remember, and those key things are going to be right here. Anytime I see the word of means I'm going to multiply, the word is means equal, and the word what, or some sort of equivalent of that, is going to be our unknown number. We've typically been calling that the letter n. Okay, so the first problem here says translate and solve. 10% of 35 is what number? My first step in doing these problems is I want to take 10% and I want to write that as a decimal. So remember, 10% as a decimal would be 0.10. The word of means to multiply. I'm going to multiply it by 35 because that's the number that's right next to it. The word is means equals, and what number refers to my letter n. What I'm trying to do here in these problems is I'm trying to get the letter n by itself. And if you notice, there's nothing around the letter n. So my n is already by itself. All I need to do is multiply those two numbers. If you take out your calculator and you multiply 0.10 times 35, you should come up with 3.5 equals n. All right, let's take a look at the next problem. The next problem says, what number is 8% of 43? Okay, so the first thing I see here is the phrase, what number? When I see what, I'm going to write my letter n. Is means equals. 8% as a decimal. Remember, I need to move my decimal point 2 spaces to the left. That's going to give me 0.08. Of means to multiply by 43. Okay, my n is already by itself, so all I need to do with these two numbers now is multiply them together. So I'm going to take my calculator, I'm going to take 0.08 times 43, and I'm coming up with n is equal to 3.44. All right, good deal. So now let's take a look at the next problem here. It says 12% of what number is 0.6? So 12% as a decimal is going to be 0.12 of means to multiply. My letter n is means equals 0.6. If you remember earlier, we're trying to get the letter n by itself. My letter n is not by itself right now because it's being multiplied by 0.12. So the opposite of multiplying is to divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by 0.12. These here will cancel. That'll leave me with n equals, now I'm going to take my calculator, I'm going to take 0.6 divided by 0.12, and I'm coming up with 5. All right, so let's try the next problem that I have here. It says 13 is 6.5% of what number? So the first thing I want to do is I want to think of that number 6.5. So 6.5, isn't 6.5 really the same thing as 6.5% of means to multiply what number? Now, I still haven't changed it to a decimal. I changed the fraction part to a decimal, but I still have a percent here. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing I did before. I'm going to write 13 equals 0.065 times n. Again, if you notice, I'm multiplying by 0.065. So I need to do the opposite, which is to divide. So I'm going to take 13 divided by 0.065 equals 0.065n divided by 0.065. Those will cancel. And if I take my calculator and I take 13 and I divide it by 0.065, I'm coming up with 200. All right, so again, in these problems here, I'm trying to get my letter n by itself, okay? So I want to get the letter n by itself. So let's take a look at the next couple of problems that we have here. And so the next one here says, what percent of 12 is 9? So I see the word what, so I'm going to write n. Since I see a percent next to it, I'm going to write n%. Of means to multiply by 12 equals 9. Again, if you notice here, I'm trying to get my n by itself, but right now it's being multiplied by 12. So I'm going to do the opposite. Oops, I wrote a 19, and I meant that to be a 9. Okay, so we're going to divide both sides by 12. So I have n% equals, I take my calculator, 9 divided by 12 is 0.75, but I need to convert that to a percent. So I'll move my decimal 2 spaces to the right, and I have 75%. All right. So the next one here says 78 is what percent of 65? 78 is what percent of 65? So I'm going to write 78 equals n% times 65. Again, I want to get my n by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by 65. So I'll take my calculator, 78 divided by 65. I'm coming up with 1.2 equals n%. If I change that to a percent, that's 120% equals n. Now, here I have 3 problems. I want you to work these 3 problems on your own. You might want to hit pause here because I'm going to go ahead and start writing each of the answers, and so you can figure out, see if you're coming up with the same thing. All right, for your first step, you should have written n equals 0.8 times 425. And so n equals, if I take my calculator, 0.18 times 425 is 76.5. Okay, you might want to hit pause because I'm going to do the next one. Okay, you should have ended up with 1.2 equals 0.12 times n. I had to change that 12% from a percent to a decimal. Since I want to get my letter n by itself, I need to get rid of my 0.12 by dividing. So I'm going to divide on both sides. And that's going to leave me, if I take my calculator, 1.2 divided by 0.12, you should come up with 10. All right, you might want to hit pause one more time. All right, so you should have ended up with n% times 80 equals 88. We need to get the letter n by itself, so we're going to divide both sides by 80. And so now I have n% equals 88 divided by 80 is 1.1, but I need to change that to a percent. That should give me 110%.